Hello and welcome to the Xenogenesis podcast. This is episode 48, in which we're discussing chapter 11 from part 3, Chkahichdahk, from book 2, Adulthood-Rites of Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy. My name is Richard Akin, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host,
Michael Glinka. Hi everyone. Wow, this part just disappeared, to be honest. Like, the previous part was really long and there was a lot of chapters that were quite long, so we had like one or two episodes that was like, I think one chapter, just one chapter, going through one chapter, but this time it just went.
Yeah, it's relatively short.
Yeah, it was a good chapter though. I mean, part.
I think the next part is shorter still.
Oh really?
Part 4, home, yeah.
Okay.
Or at least has fewer chapters. To see what the lengths are.
Yeah, and then book 3. Let's see what's gonna happen. Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, that's yeah. I'm intrigued to see how you'll take book 3. It's some interesting stuff that changes up.
Oh really? Oh, you tease, you awful tease. I really want to read it.
Yep. Well, before we get onto that, let's talk about your predictions for chapter 11, the final chapter.
Sure. So, I thought that considering how the last chapter ended, that basically it's going to continue from, and the idea is that the consensus is decided that if there are to be Akjai humans, so pure humans, Akin must be the one to lead them. Lead the way to create a world for them. So he will have to learn the means or the methods to populate a planet, different planet than Earth, because obviously Earth is going to be stripped down to barely nothing after the ships mature. And so obviously he's going to be undergoing some sort of training. Well, not just training, but I guess in longer terms, at some point, he probably will have to go and speak to the humans and be like, yeah, there's an option for you guys. You can survive by yourself, but different planet or something.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, right? He has to actually persuade the humans that they can go and have their Akjai branch on Mars.
I suspect it's probably Mars. I don't know. They have
Venus. Yeah,
it could be either or, but it's still pretty crazy.
I think the Akjai, or someone may have indicated that they thought it would be easier to do Mars.
Oh, really?
At some point.
Okay.
But I forget that they'd considered both, but I think, and I have a vague recollection that they were favouring Mars.
But the question is then, because in several billion years, 4 billion years or something, our sun is going to start to extinguish itself, so it's going to increase the size. So I don't remember which planets are gonna be sucked up into it. Definitely Earth, up to Earth, but is Mars also going to be?
I think Mars will be still outside of that radius. I think it kind of basically comes up to us. Venus and Mercury get absorbed, but we're kind of borderline. But definitely cooked.
Yeah. I mean, if we don't cook ourselves now, it's...
Yeah, that's without the greenhouse effect.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got time.
Yeah, we got plenty of time.
Years.
It's funny. I read somewhere a long time ago that some scientists or someone, they were supposed to talk to a Japanese government about something, and they were told not to mention about the sun, eventually in several billion years, eventually to that's going to absorb the Earth, because that would affect the potential stock prices on the market or something those lines. I don't remember where I read it, but I thought it was so ridiculous that there might be some sort of seed of truth in it.
And I had a vaguely related anecdote about someone who misheard someone say in about 3 billion years, the sun will expand and encompass the inner rocky planets up to about Earth, and someone said, "I'm sorry, did you say 3 million years?" And then it's like 3 billion. Oh, okay, right, yeah. Super relief.
Oh, yes, because it's going to affect me.
Exactly, right. So it's definitely going to have profound personal impact.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh, I have more time to all the things I want to do.
Okay, so we think the consensus is going to go in Akin's favor, and we're going to get some Akjai humans, and he's going to have to figure out how to terraform a planet and persuade them to go there.
Yeah, basically.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we only, I think, get to the first part about the decision to have Human Akjai.
Yeah, it's the only here is like it only says in this chapter, the consensus is, but they all believe that the humans are gonna kill themselves anyway at some point. But it's Akin's decision whether they're gonna go do it quickly or in slowly. So
yeah, it's an interesting attitude they have there.
Yeah.
Should we jump into the summary?
Yeah, sure. So chapter 11 begins with Tiikuchahk and Chkahichdahk being around Akin. When he wakes up after the exhaustion from being connected to through the Ooloi and trying to follow up with the consensus meeting. And during Akin's nap, the Akjai Ooloi went to pick them up, and now was actually in fact embracing Dichan. Sorry, not Dichan, the Chkahichdahk. He tells Akin that this is the way that Ooloi teaches about Ooloi things that are not ready for. So basically in the book it was saying that it was just holding it like in a sort of almost embrace, very tight embrace, so that it almost felt that Chkahichdahk cannot escape that embrace.
Well, I think that's kind of what it did to Akin in the previous chapter as well, right? It was kind of holding him and connecting him to the network, even though he might have otherwise kind of flinched away, as it were.
That's exactly correct, because T tells Akin that he shouldn't be able to shouldn't be capable of doing so. But the Ooloi calls Akin a sub-adult male, and that's enough of an explanation for it. Like, oh yeah, Akin is a sub-adult male. Yeah, that's enough, for like he can handle it. Okay, cool.
Akin there was able to do the same thing to them, right? To Tiikuchahk and Chkahichdahk, when the Akjai Ooloi had done that to Akin previously. So
yes, that's correct. Because when he was telling them all the experiences, he did exactly the same thing. He forced them to feel what he felt until like the very end. Until he finished. So that's a good point. I completely didn't think about it.
Yeah, and I think he talks about having like learned that skill almost without having known that he'd learned it, which is interesting. Perhaps his ability to use it is connected to the fact that he's had these experiences of being taught by the Ooloi that he would not normally have had, perhaps.
And I guess also because he matured faster.
Yeah. Plus his interaction with the consensus and what that feels like.
Yeah. Experience, man. Experience. But yeah, the conversation continued between Akin and Tiikuchahk about whether Tiikuchahk will help Akin with the project of repopulation of a planet, preparation of a planet for humans. And although Tiikuchahk wasn't sure though, because there was still the uncertainty whether it will be a male or a female. But it likes Chkahichdahk, so wants to stay close to it. And although Akin is also fond of Chkahichdahk, and Tiikuchahk tells Chkahichdahk also wants Akin because it finds it. It says he's the most interesting person it's known. Akin suggests for T to become a female because then they could be together, but because Akin himself cannot see Chkahichdahk being with Chkahichdahk without Tiikuchahk. But yeah, it's this conversation is more of like T doesn't know what it wants, right? Like it isn't sure what's going to happen, and
that they both seem still very uncertain about the whole thing. They quite like the dynamic with Chkahichdahk, I think, but there's T still doesn't know
what's going to
wants
happen
its sex
to
to be,
Yeah.
and Akin is kind of still coming to terms with this whole like wanderer thing,
Yeah.
and still coming off the previous difficulties it's had in its relationship with T, or he's had in its relationship with T.
That's correct.
Hmm.
It is here and says that the feeling that Akin could feel something else other than irritation or confusion towards Tiikuchahk was still surprising him. He still wasn't sure if he really wanted to have it as one of his mates, but at least there wasn't hate, or as you said, here notes repulsion anymore.
Yes, I wasn't sure if it was ever really like hate per se, right? I think it was always this, I don't know, almost like an extreme version of awkwardness of some kind. There was just this weird dissonance between them.
Yeah.
That they were kind of repulsed by one another, but they also they didn't want that, right? It seemed like they wanted to be like intimate, like ordinary Oankali siblings, but it
never happened.
They couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It was
It's interesting that we had this conversation a few times now, that the fact that the Oankali could not fix it. Well, I mean, they could fix it now with the Ooloi, but the fact that they couldn't fix it earlier on is what really confuses me in particular, because
yeah, it's interesting in particular that Nikanj, for example, didn't fix it or intervene in some way if it could have done, because I feel like even if the consensus from the Oankali had been, we want to isolate Akin, for the purposes of creating someone suitable for being this human advocate, I suppose.
Ambassador.
It seems as like, I don't know if Nikanj would have gone along with that if it was, detrimental to Akin and Tiikuchahk.
Yeah. I don't know, it just feels to me, with the beings that are capable of genetically modifying whatever the hell they want, not being able to sort this out without like a presence of a sub-adult Ooloi, not an adult fully trained Ooloi, it's, for me, is a bit confusing. But then again, I don't know, maybe there might be part of the Ooloi-ness in them that can't be modified. Maybe the Ooloi organelles cannot be like modified by them, like it's something that like they can't access, like in the systems, that even though they have access to all the systems except for that one particular, and they cannot just do it, they have to still follow on with the natural cycle of the beings, I would say.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the impediment is there to having an adult Ooloi fix it exactly. Maybe it's something to do with the just the way that the adult Ooloi would like react to it, almost. The like their kind of extra sensory capabilities, right? They're super sensitive. They perceive all this stuff very acutely. Maybe it's just like really unpleasant, and they wouldn't be able to effectively experience it and sort something out from it, because it would just be like too much noise. I don't know. Whereas someone who doesn't have that same degree of like mature senses can handle it. I don't know.
But then again, an Ooloi, I mean, shouldn't be capable of like they are capable of manipulating them to like not feel anything or feel pleasure. So why wouldn't they just like shift and be like, yeah, you feel pleasure with like, or you acceptance between each other? So like, I don't know. It just feels to me that there has to be some part of the Oankali that even the Oankali cannot change. Like the very, very basic, the most core thing. And I think it's something probably to do with the Ooloi organelles in them. Or the Oankali organelles.
They do seem to have some limits.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah. But then, going back to the chapter, that's when, after having the conversation and, being surprised that there's no this repulsion anymore. Akin wonders if the decision has been made, and the Kayat calls to them to join the Ooloi. And as Akin got up, he noticed that T is staying behind, and after a brief conversation, it figured, T says like it's actually afraid of what the Akjai could do to them, because if it wanted, it could hurt them, and if it found necessary to do so, like if it's necessary to teach you pain, then yes, there you go, the Ooloi will not stop from that. And so Akin sat beside Tiikuchahk and waited until it was ready to join them. And in the book, it was really nicely written. There's nothing more patient than the Oankali or the Ooloi. And so they would wait as long as it's necessary. And yeah, after some time, when Tiikuchahk got, build up the courage in him, both joined the Ooloi. And Akin was determined that the decision will be made to help humans. And here's an excerpt from the book. I think it was very important that it's read out here, because it really encompasses what was the decision made. He had been abandoned to the resistors when they took him so that he could learn them as no adult could, as no Oankali-born construct could, as no construct who did not look like quite human could. Everyone knew the resistors' bodies, but no one knew their thinking as Akin did. No one except other humans. And they could not be allowed to convince Oankali to do profoundly immoral, anti-life thing that Akin has decided must be done. The people had suspected what he would decide, had feared it. They would not have accepted it if he had not been able to stir confusion and some agreement among constructs, both Oankali-born and human-born. They had deliberately rested the fate of the resistors, the fate of the human species, on him.
Yeah, that's I think an important aspect of their decision, and it's interesting that they seemed aware of the likely direction of
where this is gonna go.
Would be concluded here. Yeah, they were just very uncomfortable with that, which is strange.
Yeah, it's a bit I would say the fact that they could predict that this may happen is, in the first place, I would say, like, I don't know, it's just, if you can predict that something has happened, why did you allow it to not happen in the first place, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty that's a question you could apply to many things in the real world.
I know, absolutely, I know, but you would suspect that I guess the fact is that they had to see what the result of a human-born male construct would be. I honestly wonder what the hell is going to be a human-born Ooloi like. If Akin is messed up like this, Ooloi is gonna be crazy. Are you not saying anything? I thought I may fish you a bit.
Well, I suspect my silence there may have tipped my hand already. But.
Yeah. But anyway, so when Akin asked why was he chosen as the leader, the Akjai told him that he is more Oankali and more human than anyone before. A contradiction of his own. And he was the most likely person to choose for the resistor, either quick death or slow, long death. And even though Akin argued that maybe they will survive, the Akjai was so certain that they won't. Very certain, because they're Akjai, how could they deny their own security of an Akjai group, of a pure group? The Akjai Ooloi thought that it's cruelty that they will be given tools to create civilization to ultimately destroy themselves.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of choice that the Oankali made there, right? They've made someone who is as capable as they can of seeing it from the human perspective, but also equipped with the kind of Oankali perceptual and communication skills to convey that to the rest of the group. They've kind of created Akin as an instrument for the Oankali to view humanity through.
Yep.
It's
yeah. So but the chapter ends with Akin saying that no matter what, he cannot not do it. humanity needs to have a chance to survive by themselves, being themselves. And although Teraforming wants to help, the Akjai tells it to find a female mate because the Akjai Ooloi tells Teraforming to find a female mate because Akin will not stay with them. Tiikuchahk isn't sure of what will happen, but whatever it is, eventually it will need to make a decision. And the Akjai tells Tiikuchahk to learn the skills that that Akin is going to do, also learn, terraforming a planet to help Akin, even though eventually T may not end up helping him, but it's a good thing to learn. And Tiikuchahk couldn't argue because at the end of the day, and Ooloi had the control over the rest, and the fact that they could manipulate and tell you to do something and you would find pleasure in doing that. And the idea that the Ooloi can do that disturbed Akin and made him look forward to wandering again. That's the word the chapter ends.
Yeah. That's a couple of interesting points in that last section there. Both Akin's discomfort with the Ooloi manipulation, which is an interesting one, right? Because that's certainly it feels like a human aspect of him, right? Because the Oankali seem pretty comfortable with that, probably because of the Ooloi manipulation.
Yeah, because they're doing it, not the one receiving it.
Yeah. And the as it were, the male and female Oankali have been subject to the Ooloi manipulation for sufficiently long that it's probably genetic at this point.
Basically, yeah.
And then, Akin's still not entirely comfortable with that arrangement, which makes sense.
Absolutely. And then there's Tiikuchahk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the fact that it's a crazy idea that you're not sure what you're going to be, and then yet you're being told to you should do this and this, and maybe it'll help, but we all know what's going to happen. Tiikuchahk is going to end up with Akin helping Akin. It's just like
although the whole narrative about Tiikuchahk's decision and so on is quite an interesting one, and it serves as a bit of a mirror to someone who might be trans or otherwise having some kind of gender identity or intersex or something like that. It's an interesting parallel to it, because in T's case, T has a lot of agency in it, right? There's a lot of choice for T.
That's correct.
Which is to varying degrees the case in what we actually see in human sexual identity. You've got people who have gender dysphoria of the kind of I'm in the body with the wrong sex, and then you have people who are just with a kind of a different type of gender identity ambiguity, as it were. People who are not feeling they're in the wrong body per se, but just not feeling strongly identified with the particular gender.
True, but for me, I'm just thinking about the whole the biology behind the in Oankali, the picking up the gender, right? Because it feels to me like in humans, physically, you can't really suddenly make an X chromosome into XY chromosome. That's just not going to happen. Just talking about pure biology. So I wonder how the Oankali's biology in the cell, the sex chromosomes look like. Do they have a triple? Yeah, that would probably make sense.
We discussed it a little bit before, didn't we, about the various different sex determination processes in animals.
We have.
It's not always chromosomally determined.
That's correct.
And
yes.
so on.
Yeah.
And so, refer to our early conversation about that.
Yeah, the conversation I don't remember.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what we touched on in that before.
We've touched probably a lot about it, but just the fact that,
I mean, although there's an interesting, to think about the parallels some more, right? We've got, humans don't have much choice over the biology, right?
Yeah.
We can do hormonal and surgical interventions, but those are still suboptimal in the quality of the result that they deliver for the most part, right?
It's just like healing the symptoms, not the trying to fix the symptoms, not the underlying cause, basically.
I mean, to some degree, but also just, even if you think of it in terms of fixing a symptom, it doesn't necessarily, like, the quality of the surgical result, as it were, can be a tricky thing. And
yes, absolutely.
like the risks associated with it, right? It's there's a lot of risks associated with surgery, whatever they are, and whether or not you get, full use out of whatever your results are from that surgery is pretty varied. So it's and also with hormonal stuff, right? The degree to which things like puberty blockers and hormonal treatments yield good results is pretty mixed, and they have interesting side effect profiles. So unless you get the whole debate about like how early should you start with these things, about the degree of certainty that people have about whether or not they want to transition, because you can often get a better quality result, as it were, if you intervene earlier. But then you have less certainty about the whether or not that person has like necessarily made the informed choice if they're making it super young, right? So there's a lot of really interesting, complicated stuff in that space.
I mean, to be fair, I don't know, like this question, and I think it'd be better left for us at least. We can't really answer it in any way. But I feel like within the next few decades, it'll be either or. We either will be like, the early intervention is what needs to be happen, if that's what but then one cannot predict, or be honest, when that gender dysphoria would appear, or when the person would start feeling it. Or it would be opposite way and be like, what we've been doing the last few decades is absolutely completely wrong, and there's different approach that has to be taken to actually address it. But this is going to it's an area that's very like hotly politicized. Yes.
And the quality of the scientific work as to like what's the actual best treatment, and to what degree can you actually stream people into, yes, intervention now is good for this, and no, it's not. Like there's a lot of very heated political debate about what we should do, and what how can we best respect people's choices and all the rest of it. And it's oftentimes the political heat ends up being counterproductive to actually quality medical science for what can be the most effective treatment for everyone. And that will be a diverse set of interventions.
I think that's the thing. Like, I think the biggest issue now is that how, as you said, politicized is this issue. If we put enough funding to a proper, studying of, psychology and, into these issues, we would probably have a better answer to it without the whole, people immediately grabbing pitchforks and going against whatever has been done. Obviously, science is not always right, but for most of the cases, this is the most probably the most accurate tool we have to actually address things like this. So, but as you said, it's probably we can't settle it, but I think the thing I'd like to point people to is Alice Drager's book, Galileo's Middle Finger. Yeah, you mentioned this book quite a lot.
I mentioned this before.
Yeah.
But it has a good sort of, how can you actually, how things happen when the science is wrong, because the science was often wrong in the past about many of these things, but like how to productively handle the scientific study of these things, and how to make sure that your activism in these spaces is informed by good science, and all the rest of it. So that's a book worth reading for anyone interested in that subject area.
Absolutely. But to be honest, but going back to tea, I just wonder, are you really, because since the chapter ended, so we can discuss this, but I wonder what the result will be, right? In my opinion, if anything, what's going to happen is what the Akjai, it's going to happen what the Akjai Ooloi said. Basically, Akin is not going to stay with them. Akin's going to be wandering, doing whatever he can to terraform the planet, whereas T is as the Akjai told the Chkahichdahk to find a female, so T is going to be a male, and that's and then maybe eventually one of them, either the Chkahichdahk or all three of them, will go and help Akin after some time.
Yeah. Just occurs to me, like, T has it considerably better than most people in a similar situation in the human scenario, right? Because their biology is already equipped to handle
this,
a transition in whatever direction it's interested and headed. And the Oankali society is totally fine with all of this. Like, they're perfectly equipped to deal with it. It's normal for them. So
I wonder if because they have to pick either male or female, but I wonder if they can actually become an Ooloi. In the extreme circumstances, if they could become an Ooloi.
I don't know. It does seem as though before the first metamorphosis, the Ooloi don't necessarily know that they're going to be Ooloi. I can't remember now.
But that's interesting, right? In because it said that, I remember that in, like, for example, the female Oankali were said to have being adapted to be very quiet, like whenever Akin was surprised by when he was like just in this chapter, the beginning of this part, actually, part 3, when he was surprised by his Oankali mother. The book described that they had like several more toes than humans, to be able to quietly and move around and to blend in with their environment, to as sort of like a means of survival. And so I just wonder, like, whether earlier on, and it did mention also that the child can become an Ooloi if the environment is hostile.
Oh yeah.
It did mention that the child could become an Ooloi if the environment is hostile. So I wonder if that could happen in the later stages.
Yeah, it's another one of these threads of the whole like biological determinism, nature versus nature conversation that's present throughout this work. To what degree is this stuff environmentally shaping? As to what degree is it a question of choice? To what degree is it a question of environment? Yeah.
No, it's just because the reason why I mentioned them, the females, is because I might have not clarified, but like the reason why, because there's some actual physical differences between male, female, and Oankali, and the Ooloi, because the Ooloi, for example, had extra appendage, the arm, whereas there's some differences between them. But I just wonder, like, in the late stages of, let's say, puberty, if they could, for example, if the environment is hostile, if they could change like they can during early development, when the child is about to be born. I think that's when they pick the other example.
I mean, they have these metamorphosis stages, right?
Yes,
so
they do.
The male and the females, I think, typically just have the one metamorphosis, and then the Ooloi kind of have two.
Yes, that's correct.
The subadult stage, and then the fully mature version, as it were.
Yeah.
So I think it seems like they undergo a partial rather than a complete metamorphosis, but it can be fairly dramatic, right? And if I remember correctly, Nikanj grew its additional sensory arm in its second metamorphosis.
Yeah.
So presumably the physical differences between the larger females, the smaller males, and the Ooloi appendages can be handled by the metamorphosis processes.
Okay, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I guess maybe since it's the end of the part, I thought that maybe I'll do a short summary of the part 3, of just to catch everyone up to what's happened the last 11 chapters. So the part starts on Earth with Dichan and Tino talking about Akin and his wandering phase, and the conversation leads to discussion about human beings being able to reproduce, and that eventually leads to the decision that Akin needs to go to the Oankali, onto the Oankali ship to learn about the Oankali and be able to create case for Akjai humans. Before the travel, though, there is a conversation of the broken bond of Akin and his sibling Tiikuchahk, and that they need to fix it, and the Oankali should be able to help. And once on the ship, Dichan, who accompanied Akin and T, introduces them to his side of the family, and the family gets to know both Akin and T. And when they feel that broken bond of theirs, decision was made to find a sub-adult Ooloi to help them. Furthermore, Akin at the time gets introduced to the Akjai Ooloi, where he gets to learn everything he can about the Oankali, and eventually the Akjai also learns about Akin's story and agrees that there needs to be something done about humans being able to live and reproduce by themselves. That's when Akin is introduced to Chkahichdahk, a potential sub-adult Ooloi partner, and its presence, very intriguing, as often described, helps to smooth the bond between Akin and Tiikuchahk. And one day Akin makes Chkahichdahk and Tiikuchahk learn about his experiences, and that triggers the consensus meeting as they go on and tell the Akjai about it, which ends with the decision, obviously from the chapter 11, of Akin learning that the means to create a planet, he needs to learn the means to create a planet for humans to live by themselves. So yeah, that's pretty much the summary of the part 3.
Yeah, pretty much wraps it up. Yeah, so we get Akin's kind of adolescent phase, his kind of political mission, as it were.
Yeah, it's the chapter was short, but like I completely forgot, to be honest, about the beginning of this part when the conversation between Dichan and Tino, and then the Tino developing ulcers because he was sort of blaming himself and purposely causing himself to be in pain for betraying the humanity in general. And
yeah, that was an interesting little insight into Tino's character and the degree to which Akin is kind of perceived to be on the side of the humans.
Yeah. And then, the whole fact that Akin for 20 years has not, almost 20 years has not visited Phoenix at all. And then the sphincter-like ship entrance to the ship. We never learned about the propulsion means or the email abilities of the ship. How do they do it? But hey, some things can't be explained, I guess.
So one other thing about Akin and this decision that he's making with the Ooloi that occurred to me before we move on to some of the topics that we've discussed in this section is like the how certain the Oankali seem to be that a human Akjai will fail. And I just wanted to kind of connect that to subjective certainty in human society and human thinking, because there's a lot of literature out there about, in many different domains, like individual subjective certainty not being a particularly good guide to like how accurate your predictions actually are. So I wonder if this might be an example of that in the Oankali, right? Are they? Is their certainty unreasonable?
I think the Oankali look at the biology a bit too deep into the biology, to be fair. Because although there is the problem, the hierarchy versus the intelligence, as they call it, the contradiction. But the fact is that humans have evolved to create, the Homo sapiens have evolved to, be a social being, right? And the fact that is we created civilizations. And yes, of course, in the history of humanity, obviously, the three things that always led to some sort of conflict was sex, money, and power, right? There's three things that there was always one of those three reasons that led to some problem. Like either somebody couldn't keep their pants on long enough and that led to a conflict, or somebody just wanted to get rich, or somebody just wanted the power over other people. That's all the three things that always led to any sort of wars. And yes, in the fact that in the universe of the Xenogenesis, we know that the nuclear war actually took place, right? And that's what wiped out the humanity. And we know that from a lot of examples that if that happened, it would lead to that. Like if one of the, it's the whole idea of the game is not to play the game. And that's what everybody's doing, is that the moment anybody is stupid enough to push that button, all hell will break loose. But the fact is that but in our world, even though there are conflicts, don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of hate and pain around in the world nowadays. But the fact is that this is probably the most peaceful period the planet has experienced in a long time. Like the number of conflicts is actually continuously decreasing, and
in relative terms, right, as a proportion of population.
Of course, in relative terms. No, of course, there's conflicts, as I said, all the time. But in relative terms, it is still decreasing. So the Oankali look in humanity of that one particular event that took place, without realizing that the history in general, led to a place at times that that we could create civilization and then be able still to connect the civilization one way or another. Doesn't have to be everybody's friends, but there's still connection between them. Like we don't, at the end of the day, a human would not hurt another human unless there's some sort of reason as such, I would say, behind it. We are social beings, and
humans.
Say again?
Most humans,
of course. Of course, there are outliers.
There are strategies the strategies to playing the social game that involve people who will willingly hurt others. Right?
Yeah,
the whole psychopath freeloader problem.
No, absolutely. But in general, I'm talking about the vast majority of humanity would not want to hurt another human being. As long there are caveats to it, but yes, in general.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like the Oankali objection to the way that humans do things is that they think it's not a sustainable game, right? In a game theory sense, right? The humans can't keep playing the game that they're currently playing and iterate it indefinitely and it not have some kind of unstable conclusion.
Yeah.
Which does seem to map reasonably well onto some aspects of human society, right? There are certain aspects of what we do that don't seem like a game we can keep playing indefinitely with the current rule set.
I mean, to be fair, I do hope that at some point we will realize that we cannot continue like this. Because, I mean, there's so many. It doesn't matter what you look into it. There's a fantasy, science fiction, dystopian fiction, whatever. There's so many authors. There's so many historians. There's so many people, smart people that actually look at this if we continue this path, we need to get better than this. And I feel, although this feeling always gets drowned by all the garbage that all those evil things that happen. You read in news. But I do have that little spark of hope that we will eventually change, one way or another. And
I mean, there is definitely an impression that we're currently passing through a period of weird tension, right?
Yeah.
So in contrast to that, impression we have from a lot of the statistics and Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature type picture of the world being a currently the best time in human history to be alive, and along many objective measurements, that's true. But everyone has this vague sense of things are not going well and everything's a bit off. And that seems to be a component of our political settlement. It feels a lot like, when you look into the history of it, what happened around the Industrial Revolution. I'm trying to think of the name of... I have a reference to a book to drop in here,
Okay.
but I can't remember what the title is.
Sure.
That does a bit of this comparison. When large-scale industrialization came along, a lot of really like weird and unpleasant side effects came with it, be it pollution and changes to working conditions and the working week and nutrition and public transport, and all kinds of things changed around the period of the Industrial Revolution, right? And governance systems were just not equipped, right? We didn't have a modern administrative state. We had, the leftovers of feudalism in terms of our governmental capabilities. And you saw this trend towards these the robber barons, right? You had a shift in power towards all of these kind of large corporate entities and a propensity for abusing that sort of monopoly power. And then we had measures to counter that, and we had a whole revolution around working conditions and anti-competitiveness legislation, and a whole system that spanned from the creation of weekends to antitrust regulations, right?
Yeah.
So a whole suite of stuff and a whole bunch of additional administrative capability in government and in companies and in legal innovations. And that took several decades.
It did.
Through the
It
Industrial
really
Revolution. Right? And things got pretty bad before action was taken on a lot of these points. And people were kind of, on the verge of or actually involved in various revolutionary activities to get some of these reforms in place. And I think we find ourselves in a bit of a similar moment in history, because the internet has been a step change in technology.
And the way the society functions as well, because now
that's the thing, right? We, in the same way that the industrial era led to a complete mismatch between the capabilities of the administrative state and how we govern ourselves, and the new technological and private sector environment, we find ourselves in a similar situation now, where we have a complete mismatch between the administrative capabilities of our state and governance organizations and the activities in the private sector and just of private individuals.
Yep.
That we need an analogous step change in the way that governance works. And most of the problems that you see in various aspects of what we perceive as being this sort of general malaise about what's going wrong seem to have their roots, to me, in poor governance, right? And there's a lot of everyone kind of either blames a cabal of elites for conspiring against whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
There's this propensity for doing that, like assuming someone's in charge and blaming them. Right? That's not the problem, and it's not the failure of governments or the evilness of corporate entities or whatever. It's a failure of governance in the structures of the systems that we have to manage the balance of these things. It's a failure to have the institutions that are capable of acting on behalf of people. So I mean, there's a sense in which it's a failure of government, but it's not a failure of the wrong parties in power. It's a structural failure of government. It's the way that our democratic processes work. It's the way that our decision-making systems work. It's the way that our media and communications ecosystems work. It's much more granular and subtle than the wrong people are in office. And a broken system will readily corrupt someone who's trying to do the right thing, right? There's only so much you can push uphill against an incumbent like system.
Right? Absolutely. No,
you can get the best people possible in government, and it still won't fix the fact that there are systemic problems with the way that we're doing governance.
Yeah. To be fair, I was thinking about we've talked about the whole consensus idea and how often probably a lot of problems would be solved if people could feel what other people have, right? The whole idea of like, if you could experience the pain, the despair other people feel, a lot of problems probably would go away because people not want to cause those things. But I just thinking physically, how would we do this? And obviously at this moment I can think of one way is that whole Elon Musk's Neuralink. But realistically, just realistically, like thinking about it, this technology would never be used for I would say a good for humanity, but it would be used for things like, you wake up at 2:00 in the morning because somebody hacked your chip and now he's playing you, he's rickrolling you all night, or basically you wake up with a fucking ad in your head and it's just like type of stuff of nonsense like this, and it,
I think it's a bit too literal an interpretation of the feeling one of the people are feeling, right? It's more, I think we don't need that level of technology to attain something similar, right? One can empathize with the characters in media.
But
that's
then
one way of doing it.
But
right?
Richard,
that can help.
What if there are people out there who are not capable of emphasizing, like the empathy, right? And those people are usually a lot of, although just after what you said about the whole, it's not often about the individuals who are in the power. That's what's the problem is the system. But a lot of cases, there's people in the power that like are incapable of that basic human emotion, empathy.
Well, yes, but that is like recursively a part of the problem with the system, because those people were successful as competitors and rose to those positions because of the structure of the current system.
Yeah. So it's like no, but I just thought it was an idea that like, there is in theory technology, but we would never use it in the way that would
I mean, that's kind of technology is value neutral, right? You can use it however you see fit. And it's a question of how we choose to use all of our technologies that is that's the political question, right? That's the governance question.
Yeah.
That's the market and the economy question, right? It's the current incentive structure for building the types of technology that we currently have is what's causing the problem, right? The existence of the smartphones that suck up all our attention and so on, and those sorts of like technological problems are not inherent to the existence of the smartphone. Right? It's the design of the software and the tools that shapes whether or not how much screen time you're spending on the device is or is not a good thing, right?
Yeah.
If more screen time correlates to like greater fulfillment and connection with other humans, which like it potentially could, if you'd had a human-centered design approach and a better incentive structure around those kind of things, then people will they blame the wrong thing. Right, they blame the existence of the technology rather than the way that we're using the technology, and they don't delve into why we're using it that way and how they can address that.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess we should come back from this very, I would say, optimistic topic, happy topic.
Well, I think it is genuinely. It's actually. The message there is an optimistic one, like the fact that the existence of all this stuff does not in itself mean that it's doomed. It's just like we're using it wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So we just have to figure out how to use it better, which is something that we can potentially politically do. We just have to be aware of the fact that for the most part, the things we're currently blaming are not the source of the problem, and organize coherently around actual solutions-orientated approaches to fixing these things, rather than, randomly going in there with the, ban this, ban that.
It's not gonna
surveil everyone.
Yeah.
It's these kind of like unsubtle solutions that have missed the point of what the actual source of the problem is and how you might go about fixing it, that are at least as much of a threat as the problem.
Slapping a band-aid basically on the...
Yeah. It's and I think it's an interesting one because it's a challenging appreciating the dynamics of that system, especially when it's technology, which is, so magic looking from the surface when you don't have an in-depth understanding of what it actually does under the hood and how it works and the dynamics that shape it and the politics of the institutions that produce it. Right? That's opaque to a lot of people. So, the political frustration at, all this vague perceived things not working right makes a lot of sense. But it seems like the result is people flailing around for something to blame, but we haven't kind of coalesced around a common understanding of the real source of the problem, which we are, I think, increasingly beginning to do in the public discourse. Right? There's people are beginning to understand the problems and start to think about what the solutions to those might look like. And you're seeing it in, less so in the top line media and political leaders, but it's surfacing in, what it is that the political functionaries, as it were, are doing. The people who are, the policy wonks and the civil servants and the alternative media organizations, there's people are noticing this stuff and organizing around it, and the solutions to many of these problems are relatively well understood. It's just translating them into political implementation is very challenging under the current political system and without popular support. But as it gains in popular understanding, I think the direction is positive there.
Let's hope it is going to be like that.
Yeah. Oh, there are still plenty of failure modes, and I'm definitely still worried. But there's a a ray of hope that we can get in the right direction. Yeah. But to relate all that discussion to the book, I think we can probably connect that up a little bit with the Oankali consensus mechanism, right?
Yeah,
there are some parallels there.
No, absolutely. That's the whole reason why we started this discussion was because of the consensus and the idea of how the Oankali communicate and how deep their connection is. And that's why, sort of, in a way, that makes their, in a way, superior to us, being able to solve certain problems before they become an issue, in a way. If you know what I'm saying.
I think I know what you mean. Yeah, another component, I think, of what they have in this consensus communication thing that they do is openness and honesty.
Yeah. Well,
in that it's very difficult for them to lie or mislead in this context, right?
They can't lie, but they can stay quiet.
They can stay quiet, which is reasonable, right? And they do have there's a sense in which there is a preservation of privacy if you kind of opt out to some degree of these processes. It's an interesting dynamic. Actually, it's one that I think is slightly imperfect about the Oankali consensus thing, is that for the most part, if you want to participate in the conversation, you have to be you have to expose quite a lot about yourself.
Yes.
You can't sort of keep some aspects of it isolated, right? There's not a very good privacy architecture in the Oankali system, which is important for effectively for political diversity, but it also has a whole host of the absence of privacy in various kinds of network interactions creates a lot of liabilities and bad incentives, because if you have access to a bunch of information about the people who use your service, you now have responsibility for doing something with that information.
Yeah.
Right. So as soon as you have it, it creates a possibility of external pressure to use it, which can be a problem. So that is a common structural issue of the way we currently handle data. And I suspect one of the things that we will see in the relatively near future is that, we will look back on how we handled data and the degree to which we collected it in institutions as just like what the hell were they doing, right? They just had all this stuff just out there and in the open so that anyone could people are going to look back at the security architecture and the privacy architecture of these systems as just being completely nuts and creating massive liabilities for everyone involved, right? Some of the stuff that we're likely to move to, in my opinion, is much more privacy focused, in that it can give you the information that you need and nothing else for a particular transaction, right? And not keep a record of who and where and when. It's this concept of self-sovereign identity and related systems that essentially, so for things like, I don't know, vaccine passports and whatnot, right, you can architecture that in a couple of different ways. You can architecture it in a way where you have a credential that proves that you have been vaccinated according to a relevant authority, and does nothing else. It doesn't say who you are. It doesn't say where that was authenticated. It doesn't have any connection to a central thing that logs that. Right? You can set up a cryptographic algorithm in such a fashion that it does that. Right? You can prove, without proving anything else about yourself, that you have been vaccinated, for example, right? Make it very resistant to any kind of other attack, and also mean that you don't have to check in with a centralized database to ascertain that, right? This is a thing that's been cryptographically signed by someone who we trust to have issued that credential, and that's it, right? The current architecture around that is very different. It tends to be, we look you up with a unique identifier that's tied to your identity and a bunch of other stuff in a central database. And the fact that we look you up is logged, and who looked you up is logged, and all of that additional information is created. So now you have a very different situation, because now you have to trust that all of that information is going to be used responsibly by the institution that now has it.
That's true, yeah.
Which, for something like a vaccine passport, if you actually want to encourage everyone to get one of those, having it tied to a system that is technically not capable of collecting that information centrally means that anyone with any concerns about the privacy associated with it doesn't have an issue with that, right? So anyone who is in your society, let's say someone is an illegal immigrant, but they still need to be able to prove they've been vaccinated, right? If they can do it in a decentralized fashion with a credential like that, they don't have to worry about the fact that even going to the shops and proving they've been vaccinated could get them arrested and kicked out of the country, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have to prove your identity in that fashion, we have this deep challenge to to handle when it comes to what we're going to do with data like that and the trust that we have in all these systems.
No, you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
And that will there's a likelihood that the trust will get better over time, but you have to build in like a two-way component to that. Right? You have to trust the citizenry as the government, as well as requiring the citizenry to trust the government, which is a challenge given some of the things that institutions have been like known to get away with. Right? These things have some give and take.
It's this. It's the fact that the problem is with as you're saying, these technologies, depending on who has access to them, that's the thing. I think that's the biggest crucial thing. Who has access to them is always the biggest issue. But I think there's all the you mentioned illegal immigrants, but that's an issue on itself as well. That sort of leads to another sort of type of conversation that.
Part of the problem that we have with this is that collecting all of the data in this fashion exposes some of our hypocrisies and internal contradictions.
Yeah.
Right. So many of the things that we currently tolerate, but which are technically illegal, come into sharper focus once we have access to all this information. Right. So what we actually end up having to do is come to a new political settlement that's more grounded in the realpolitik of the situation, right? Because our current laws don't reflect what our actual norms are, right? That they account for the lack of ability to enforce some of those things. And sometimes that's actually a feature and not a bug, right? The whole existence of the grey and black economy, like a good chunk of that in a society that has much more complete information ends up having to be legal, or you're in a police state, right? There's no, like, we have to kind of deal with our own hypocrisy around the inconsistency of enforcement mechanisms and the like attitudes that we have to what should and shouldn't be legal in a world where we can and can't enforce that, right? There's this whole what's that? There's a book called 3 Felonies a Day, I think, which basically has the hypothesis that or makes the case that in the US you basically everyone commits 3 felony offenses a day, which, you know, if we had perfect information and convicted everyone of that, like, we would clearly change the laws.
Yeah.
Right? That if we actually had perfect enforcement, we would have to do something structurally different because, like, we can't make those things line up, right? So there's a component of that which interacts substantially with the whole privacy concern. That and things like the massive asymmetries of power that are created when you centralize that kind of information and give one group of people much more leverage over it than others.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So it's kind of, we need to make a bit of a decision about what aspects of to what degree are we willing to engage with that question, right? And to what degree are we willing to have that information be shared and actually change the way that we think and legislate about these things. And much of those things should be changed, right? That's productive, right? Having that information exposes useful things that we can use to fix those inconsistencies in our systems. But there are other areas where you actually just, it's information of that sort is dangerous to have anyone knowing, and or because it has with it a power over the people about who you have that information. Right? And
to be honest,
most of our like constitutional legal constructs are limits on the power of the state to do particular things. Right? That most of our fundamental rights are, like, in some sense, limits on the power of these institutions to know stuff about us. So a lot of that needs to be coupled to privacy in some sense.
No, I agree, but in the same time, it's what I'm thinking of now is that this is true at the moment, but like in a different matter as well. The whole idea of social media and the fact that some people leave a now basically a trail of what, let's say, people change every several years. You know, like if you encounter things, you travel, etc., your points of your views around the world change, and nowadays the fact is that a lot of in the social media where people like dig out people's history, because in the past when they were young and fucking stupid they would say something, and now it's being dragged dragged around is an issue, because people have the right to change. And the fact,
and what's that quote from Keynes? It's like, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do?
Say again.
When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do?
Yeah. So
it's when you get new information, you update. Right?
Yeah.
You change what you think,
and
or like, what was the point of getting any new information?
Exactly. So that's the thing. Like, people do change, and and there's a lot of things that a lot of people, I don't know if they like nowadays is not accepted. You have to be good from the very beginning. Otherwise you're just basically, you're evil and you should be completely destroyed, right?
Yeah, that's kind of like bad human political instincts coupled with the panopticon record of our lives.
They
don't mix well.
This is like it might sound like a silly example, but when Skyrim came out and you have the choice to save Parthenax or not, the dragon on top of the mountain, and he says, what's better, to be good from the beginning or overcome evil with great effort? Everybody from most people will be like saving it because they agreed with that. But nowadays this whole point of view completely changed. Now this whole debate about whether or not, if you change, of course there are things that are not acceptable, and a lot of things you'll have to do a lot of acrobatics to show that you're a different person if you did something really despicable. But in general cases, the whole idea that the fact that there would be let's say a history you could follow, that and people think that the people cannot change on their views, it's, for me, is the biggest flaw of the current society in general. That the fact that people can realize that what they've done is wrong, or what their opinions were not the best, and they could change their beings, considering if they're when they have facts, and it takes time and it takes an effort, but yeah, it's just the whole, that sort of, in a way, it sort of emphasizes that this is the sort of this most surface level example of what you were talking about. The whole issue with the society, the whole laws, and not being able to us basically doing felonies every day because we just simply this is the government doesn't follow, the changes in the laws are not following up the changes in society fast enough. And that sort of societal history sort of pitchfork hunting is it feels almost, it's more like there's a couple of components to that, right? There's the kind of the social norms around using past information about you to your detriment, even dating back to when you were a teenager, and this kind of the temporal flattening of your life into the permanent record of what's written about you on the internet, or the record of your history on the internet that doesn't necessarily
stuff that was in the past doesn't necessarily capture what you think now. Even so you listen to this podcast, right? And you binge the entire thing as you're reading the book, right? It's been a couple of years for us. It might be a couple of weeks for you. We may have changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. The same thing is true of many other people in many other contexts, where you take something from a considerable time ago and you say, like, this defines you and your opinion on this subject, and rather than like re-engaging with that, I mean, okay, it's productive to point out you thought this thing, which is not sure that's a good thing to think about this subject. Like, let's bring that up, but be like, what do you think about it now?
Yeah, instead of like, you thought that means that you're an asshole.
This is for all time your unchanging opinion on this matter, to which we can hold you, and
basically
we don't like it.
Yeah, basically hold someone hostage to something that it's true. Like, to be honest, for us, this podcast has been ongoing for 2 years now, if I'm counting correctly, and
yeah, pretty much.
It's been a journey personally for me to discuss topics that previously I either never thought of or never really read upon or never really bothered about them, because it never occurred to me that it's something that it doesn't affect my life, but doesn't mean that it doesn't affect someone else's life. And the fact that there's this loss of nowadays, the loss of the fact that one can go and change their views, check their views, and check the facts behind their views and change their views, even the next day, because some new information came in. And then somebody could go out and, like in several years, so after we finish, maybe in several years, if we don't do this podcast anymore, or we evolve in a way, this podcast, that it's something else, and somebody will go back to this particular conversation and say something, oh, Michael said this and this at the time. And it's like, yes, I did, because at the time I had this information and facts. And the fact is that I might have not enough all the facts and not enough knowledge about the topic. It was just my opinion that at the time maybe being informed. But nowadays, I know more about the topic, and we have more information that I completely changed my... Doesn't mean that I'm the same person anymore.
Absolutely, yeah. There have been times where I've shifted my opinion a little bit on a subject after having gone and reread the references when I was writing up the timestamps. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
This stuff shifts. I think that's one of the things that one of the things the podcast medium is good at, actually, because it has this conversational style. The most successful podcasts are typically of a conversational, non-scripted kind of structure, right? It's just people having a conversation about whatever it is, right? And there's something about the spoken word which is somehow less permanent in the sense that we have about it, right? If something's written down, it feels kind of, I don't know, like official and fixed in time. And but if you experience reading an article, feels a bit different, right, from listening to a podcast. So an opinion that I offer in text might well be subject to greater holding to account than an opinion that you offer in voice, right? That certainly psychologically, that's the way that I think we tend to experience text. Although I don't know that that's evolved sufficiently for the era of Twitter, right? Because stream of consciousness writing wasn't a thing when you had printing presses.
I think nowadays is a bit different though, because now anything, to be honest, because in past written written sort of what's the word, not diaries, or what I'm thinking of, the written evidence, not evidence, yeah, sort of in a way, the follow history, in ancient history, everything that we know is from written scripts that were done, at the time. And the fact is that those even have sort of influence of the person's attitude towards that event or type of thing. Nowadays, this is more. There's more means of recording your opinions and also the fact of the events taking place through those means. Like, for example, this might sound a silly example, but it sort of proves this point, is that when the coup took place on Myanmar, right? We've learned about it. Not from news, but at least for me, but from basically a lady who was just doing a yoga dance or something, or like fitness dance in front of a hotel, and just by chance she recorded the whole, insurrection taking place, and and then of course the news picked up on it, and then it was written down, and of course be like, oh, this took place and stuff like that. But in reality, like, just because of some side event, some other means of media recorded this event, it's now, I think, more like it's on par on written like papers and written documents, for at least for me, because it's just like it
I think it's more that we haven't like psychologically adapted to the to that like collapse of those media into being of similar cost, as it were. Right, because it like all the media we get from the past that's preserved in text and so on, the further you go back, like the more resources had to be invested in creating it, and the more like book publishing and the printing press was for a long time very censorious, as well as being very expensive, right? So the stuff that you can get in print that survives may telling quite a different story from the stuff that was being written, let alone from the stuff that was being said by people at the time. And in our era, those things are flattened, right? That which is being said and written and spoken and videoed all have near negligible cost. So like conventional thinking about the degree to which one should weight different media is a bit out of whack.
No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And that's the issue nowadays, is that you can have this amount of media that overflows and allows you to see certain information, but that in-depth analysis that would be required to actually think about it, and like, for example, let's say historical records, that would, for example, in past be like a person traveling to an area and discussing the events with people and collecting information, their opinions and stuff like that, and then recording it down from a perspective of, for example, an outsider. Nowadays, you get people pulling out the smartphones, and then it's like, oh, in my opinion, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, like, as we've talked about this, the reference point of view, where basically your reference view can be different to a person across the street, because, for example, you were paying attention to an event where they weren't, and they saw something else. And that's often the problem, for example, in the police, when they were like questioning. And we've talked about this before, but the reason why I'm mentioning it is because the fact that, like, for example, in scientific writing, we write something and we look into sources, and it's usually, that for me is more official, really specific, like for you now, you're saying that the written record, because that I know takes time to do.
Okay, that's an interesting one. The whole subject of the scientific literature in the modern era is a complicated one, because like our current track record on a lot of like big and important and like to the interest of the public stuff has not been particularly great at successfully communicating a coherent message.
I agree with that.
Right? That's we got, climate change and various aspects of food and nutrition science and all kinds of stuff about like pollution and toxins and environmental contamination, all that stuff. We've not had a successful time communicating that to the public. And vaccines and pandemic measures, right? That's also not exactly gone like smoothly with respect to science communication. And of course, the inclination is to pin this all on misinformation and the like. But in many ways, again, this is a more subtle structural problem with the way that we actually do both the funding and the communication and publication of scientific research, rather than necessarily something we should blame purely on like misinformation actors, right? If our architecture around communicating what we understand and how we understand it is not resilient to the presence of hostile actors in this space, which is not a thing that we've had to deal with so much before, right? We have this problem of a broken epistemic commons and not knowing what to trust as a good, reliable source of information. And I think substantially because we don't have a sort of ability to have a robust conversation in public about these issues in a way that's credible, right? We have this kind of very archaic mechanism of scientific publication where we spend several years writing up a long, complicated paper in Sciences that only people in our little subdiscipline can really get a handle on. And then we ask our peers to confidentially review what we've written. Often people in whom we're in some degree of direct competition for resources and who are incentivized to find something wrong with it. And then and only then might it get into the public eye. And there's very little like feedback on it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not in a medium that's well formatted for communication to anyone outside of our niche. Right? It doesn't do well for like science journalists, especially with the decline of economic resources for journalism. Doing science journalism would have been getting harder anyway because of the media dynamics, but it's getting harder still because of the scientific publishing dynamics. That's just the communications aspect of it, let alone
the research part of it.
The research and economics. Yeah, there's a whole other. We have a lot of
another Pandora's box that
control of the publishing industry.
We all have to deal with, but will not bore it you today.
Yeah. Maybe at some point. I have a whole spiel on things we might be able to do to help fix the academic publishing industry.
We have a whole box of we can talk about what's wrong and how we could solve it and why it's not going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, so we should probably not go down that rabbit hole today, but maybe on another occasion. Who knows? I know. But that was a particularly extensive tangent. Let's
we've taken quite a long.
Roll things back a little bit. To circle back a little bit and relate that to the Oankali communications, right? The whole thing started out because in the Oankali context, they didn't really have much choice but to be honest about what they're communicating. So they don't have some of these problems in the epistemic commons, right? They don't have to deal so much with mis or disinformation, only with potentially a little bit of missing information from people who are not joining the consensus. But it means they have the ability to make collective decisions on good information, because and also on with a greater appreciation for the degree of uncertainty to some degree. Although, ironically, they end up being very subjectively certain about some things when it might or might not be a good idea.
Some aspect,
No.
But so coming back from this massive tangent, there are some topics that we've discussed. Maybe we should talk about the topics we've actually discussed, not only just today, but what we discussed over the last several episodes covering this part. And in a way, obviously, this time we had sort of a bit less topics in terms of biology, not as much as we'd had in previous parts. But for example, from physics, computing, sort of this sort of like aspect of our life, we talked about analog computing devices, although I don't remember in what term it was. Do you recall what it was?
I don't remember how exactly we got onto analog computing devices, but maybe it was... I mean, we talked quite a bit about analogies between biology and computation.
Yeah, I think that was that we talked about. Is just this aspect. We talked about directional speakers. I'm not sure why it was particular in this case, but God, it's only been a few episodes and I can't remember why we talked about those things.
Yeah. I don't remember where that came up.
We talked about fusion power. That was, I remember, about the whole ship, and then sort of being, having its own power source. So that was one thing we were talking about.
Oh yes, yeah.
We talked about subnuclear particle detection in Oankali. So that
and we got onto that whole thing about aneutronic fusion.
Yes.
And dense plasma focus.
Yeah. We mentioned Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister, quite a lot.
Yes. Yeah, that was another one of my vaguely political rant tangent sessions like we just had.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, discussion about Audrey Tang really fits into what we were talking about today, because it actually relates to it.
Yeah.
And
but part of my optimism on those political subjects is related to some of the stuff that they're innovating in Taiwanese democracy.
Yeah. And the final point here, you added ethics of creating beings and controlling their hedonics. Yes. That was the conversation we had about whether you want to create animals that enjoy being used by humans. That was an interesting conversation, to say at least.
Yeah. I think that was in the context of the Tilio, the little
yes. The Tilio was enjoying Akin
animal.
And basically, yeah.
And I suppose the ships and stuff as well, also in that context. Yeah. As the pop cultural references I was contrasting there was Rick from Rick and Morty's butter passing robot that is capable of experiencing existential angst for no readily apparent reason.
Yes, that's correct.
And house elves from Harry Potter, right? Who, with the exception of Dobby, seem to enjoy their state of servitude. And then there's the whole saga where Hermione's like campaigning for their freedom,
and they're like, just like, nope,
don't want her to. And it's like, yeah. It's like, should we campaign for their freedom? They seem perfectly happy about this, but like, it was probably some kind of messed up curse that made them happy about it in the first place.
That sounds quite possible. Yeah, quite probable. No, those are interesting topics. And then biology-wise, obviously we were talking about the organelle, the Ooloi organelle. That's just like a parasite or symbiote in a way.
How do we draw the line between a mutualist or a symbiote and a parasitic organism? And sometimes that's subtle.
You mentioned here transposons. What did we talk about transposons about?
I'm trying to remember when they came up. I think that might have been in a similar context about... it probably came up with the discussion of mutualism, right? Because they're genetic parasites. So sequences of little bits of information that are effectively parasitic, but like viruses. Yeah. But like baked into your genome, and they sometimes have been co-opted to positive functions, right? Transposable element promoters and stuff that are now used as regulatory features in stuff that we use for our normal biology. I was kind of talking about the line between mutualism and parasitism.
Yeah. And then, of course, like the whole idea of biology being treated as computing, that we were talking about then, those mycelium networks. I think that was the specific examples of we were talking about the whole idea of complex systems.
I think the other reason that came up was thinking about the limits on the Oankali's ability to like design biological systems.
Yes.
And their kind of the limits of their perceptual abilities, right? How much can they actually perceive, and how well can they predict what will happen with changing a given thing, right? Because you have all these complex systems where small changes, small perturbations to the system can produce very large effects.
Yeah.
So you have this whole chaos theory problem of, can you actually predict it? And all of the implications of that for actually being able to do genetic engineering well without a lot of empirical work.
Yeah,
I suppose.
I mean, it's just thinking about it, like, I don't know if we talked about it, but like the whole idea of like a protein can interact with several different proteins just because its active sites just happen to, allow for it, and type of thing, that the idea that they have to have this computing power to be able to actually resolve those issues. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how can they, with what kind of resolution can they actually predict this stuff, and to what degree are biological complex systems computationally irreducible, right? Do you have to actually like simulate exactly what's going to go on to know what the outcome is, or are there more generalizable rules that we can use, to where we're going to run up against that limit, right? Biological systems have, because they're like very generalizable, effectively like computer systems.
Yeah.
Can the conventional approach of or to what degree will we be able to successfully apply the conventional scientific approach that's worked so well for physics and chemistry and so on to a system that has that may have computationally irreducible components? So a generalized problem of complex systems studies as well as biology.
We looked into metamorphosis. It was with the whole conversation we had today about the whole, T either being male or female, and
we hadn't really related metamorphosis in the Oankali context to organisms in the real world that do metamorphosis. And I think actually, I suppose one of the things that came up earlier was like, how dramatic can that transformation be? For being a male or a female or an Ooloi, where they have quite physically distinct characteristics in the Oankali, and to compare to some real world examples, butterflies, for example, they have a really massive metamorphosis.
Yes,
right? They
basically become liquid goo and then become something else. That's just.
It's like a whole second developmental process.
Yeah.
Like everything, from the wings to the digestive tract to the mouth parts to the eyes. It's like complete new set of developmental biology stuff, which is fascinating in and of itself, right? The two basically completely different developmental programs with very different starting points. And really fascinating stuff.
Of course, we talked about things that at the time when Akin met the Chkahichdahk and the whole pheromone situation and the effect, like the whole idea with the sex and the whole pheromones and consent and all this directed. This conversation went on a lot of branches of this this topic.
We didn't actually really talk much about the biology of pheromones.
No, we haven't talked specifically,
kind of,
but just in general, like in general, we've talked about it. We talked about, you wrote about the whole Oankali communication and the fact that they resurrected the language. That was a topic that we've spoke about, and that was really pretty crazy idea that, you can resurrect a language, how you pronounce and speak and stuff like that, simply because there's necessity for it, because it's written somewhere in your genes.
Yeah, and the capacity they had to resurrect that language, and the fact that they kind of had to, the implications of that are for their ability to communicate with one another, right? The way that the constraints that language place on how we can communicate versus the way the Oankali natively communicate. And we had the whole analogy, again, to computer stuff there with, like, the Oankali direct communication is almost like, you know, they can send one another, like, binary compatible files to run the same code on a different person's brain. Whereas with spoken language, we have to serialize everything into a higher level abstract representation and then recompile it into something that may or may not run quite the same on the other person's brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then we talked about incest. That was just in general interesting topic. And finally, sort of, we discussed about the mirror hand experiment. Why did we talk about this?
I'm trying to remember what that was. Something about perception of your body, or like body image. I don't know, the whole ability to trick you into.
I don't remember. I would have to check. But yeah, there's one of the topics we've talked about it. But everyone, as you can hear, like, we've did those episodes a long time ago, because some of these topics were just before Christmas. We've recorded like last year and early in December, and none of this tells us anything.
Yeah, we went back through our show notes and pulled out the stuff that looked interesting that we'd talked about.
Yeah,
and then
didn't check why we talked about it. That's nice. Well done to us. But yeah, we've talked about a lot of stuff, and even though there was this part 3, Chkahichdahk, was short, it still gave us a plentiful of things to discuss about. To be honest, half of it I would say probably is a lot of off-tangent discussion, like today.
I mean, yeah, but I'd like the fact that we can have these tangential discussions with this material as a seed, I think, speaks well of this material as a seed. Right? There's a lot of richness in there, and we bring a whole bunch of additional contextual and interpretive lens to the whole thing, but that's the fun part, right? If we were just reading the book, then this would be an audiobook.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. We've learned a lot, and then now the consensus is that Akin has to do what he planned originally. But now, where do we go from here?
Yeah, so we've had kind of a coming of age arc for Akin. And we had a childhood trauma, and now we have a maturing into an adult and deciding to take on a particular project or
a monumental task, I would say, of creating a planet for humanity to survive on.
Yeah. And I said deciding, but realizing that he's going to do this, possibly having decided to, but possibly having been engineered into doing it.
Yeah.
No, but there's definitely a lot of free will determinism subtext in this. Yeah.
And on that note, do we go to chapter 1 prediction of the part 4 home?
Yes. So what are you expecting to happen next at the beginning of this part?
So at least for the next beginning of the part, we'll definitely be going to be back on Earth. And, the fact that, Akin back from after, I don't know, actually a year maybe passed on the Oankali ship, Akin being back on the surface of the chaotic planet that the Earth is. It's time to, it's for him, it's time to prepare to make the first steps for the humanity to preserve, i.e. going to villages, saying, "Hi guys, do you want your own planet? Do you want to survive as humans and not human Oankali? Fine, but you can do it on a different planet." And that's gonna. I'm sure that's gonna be an interesting aspect, and I'm sure there will be some who will want, and some who will be like, "I will die on this planet," because they're stubborn as hell, and that's the way humanity is. And I guess that's also acceptable.
Yeah, that seems like an interesting challenge, right? It's the added component of you can still keep humans going, but you have to do it on another planet. Right? You've been kicked out of your home world. We're taking that. And
but that's the thing.
You've got this rock.
I'm sure that they will ask him, like, why it cannot be an Earth? And then Akin be like, well, because it's going to be stripped completely naked.
Yeah.
Which I don't get. I honestly don't get. Like, they are going to use the whole planet, right? So you're going to go like, oh, let's use Mars. It's like, why not just prepare some sort of Mars and then also work on Earth as well to repopulate Earth? Like, you could do terraform 2 planets.
But I mean, it's like Earth has finite resources, right?
I mean, if they're gonna pull
eventually
everything out of it, then yes, absolutely. You know,
yeah.
Even like if they're not gonna leave in the iron core inside, then well, then
I suppose it depends how useful they find those minerals. Right?
Yeah.
It's but the Oankali, they're a spacefaring species, right? They will get through all those resources and reform them into something that's useful to them, and they seem perfectly happy to just be out there in the vacuum in their big living ships, as long as they can get some energy input, presumably from some suns every now and then. What do they need a planet for?
Yeah,
right. It's just big blob of chemical resources.
But yeah, so I think this is what's going to happen. This is going to be this last part is going to be the not preparation, but more of like Akin trying to convince as many humans as possible about that they have choice of survival on a different planet, and that's where the chapters, the book is gonna go, and that's. I still think, going back to our other old predictions, that there's going to be some sort of civil war, because there will be people who refuse to do this, and it's going to be tough for some people to accept that, and they will, rather to die on the planet than be moved around like unwanted like tenants or something.
Yeah, we have kind of we've got a human reservation over here that you can come live on, and people are going to object to that.
Absolutely, they will definitely object to that.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah.
And that leaves us with I think enough of a prediction to get started.
Yeah,
with.
absolutely. So yeah, everyone, thank you very much for listening today. This was a pretty long episode, considering the fact that we went off tangent for quite a while. But thank you very much, everyone, for listening. If you want to find all the other places we upload our podcast, you can go to our website, xenogenesis.com. I was Michael Glinka.
I was Richard Acton.
Bye.
Goodbye. Oops, yeah, this was like almost 2 hours.